prosecution submission.
This is Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. The USS Missouri has been converted into a museum. The World War II battleship is anchored in Pearl Harbor and is now a popular tourist destination. On September 2nd, 1945, the Japanese Foreign Minister Mamoru Shigemitsu and the Chief of the Imperial Japanese Army General Staff, Yoshijiro Omotsu, signed Japan's unconditional surrender on the deck of this very ship. They surrendered on behalf of the Emperor of Japan and the Japanese Imperial General Headquarters. It marked the formal end of World War II. 10 days later, the Supreme Commander for the Allied Powers, General Douglas MacArthur, ordered the arrest of 39 Japanese war criminal suspects. Former Prime Minister Hideki Tojo was the first name on the list. Elliot Thorpe, head of US counterintelligence, after receiving the order, soon dispatched soldiers to serve the arrest warrant. Reporters quickly camped out at Tojo's residence. Tojo looked out his window and, realizing what was transpiring, reached for his pistol. The American military police ran into the room and saw blood gushing from Tojo's chest. The bullet had missed his heart because he was left-handed. He was rushed to the US Army's 98th Evacuation Hospital in Yokohama.
At an American evacuation hospital in Japan, U.S. doctors attempt to save ill-famed Tojo with a transfusion of American blood. The volunteer is Sergeant John Akinall, who, like all of us, wants Tojo to live and stand trial.
Saving Tojo's life had only one purpose: to make him stand trial. However, the trial needed to be conducted in a fair and transparent manner. Potsdam is a small town west of Berlin in Germany. The Potsdam Declaration was signed here in Sicilienhof Palace towards the end of World War II. On July 26, 1945, the leaders of the United States, United Kingdom, and Soviet Union issued the Potsdam Declaration. The document urged Japan to surrender immediately and unconditionally. It also authorized legal punishment of war criminals. The Japanese government held 2 emergency cabinet meetings in response to the declaration. They decided to center their legal defense on exonerating the emperor. They would defend their country as well as themselves. On August 28, 1945, the first American soldiers landed in Japan. There was a 2-week period between the Allied forces' arrival at Atsugi Airport and their full occupation of the country. At that point, the Japanese government and the Imperial Army were well aware they would be held accountable for war crimes. Cabinet members decided to burn all the evidence and documents in their possession. The order was clear and simple: do not leave a single scrap of paper. From that time on, there would be no trace of meeting memos or written records from the Supreme Council for the Direction of the War. Documents in the Philippines and Southeast Asia were also destroyed, as were the files concerning China and Manchuria.
でそれを恐れてもう徹底的に証拠隠滅を図る。これはもう上から下で軍部だけでなく外務省、それから内務省かな、官庁も日本軍の公式な文書、あとそれを見た今度一般の兵士とか将校も個人の日記を燃やすわけですよね。
In the meantime, MacArthur had issued 4 arrest warrants for the 118 most wanted Japanese war criminals. The warrants were for senior commanders of the army or government officials responsible for initiating the war. In order to obtain enough evidence against the accused, MacArthur established the International Prosecution Section, or IPS, in December 1945. Joseph Keenan was appointed its director. Among the first things the IPS did was issue a charter, which officially announced the establishment of the International Military Tribunal for the Far East. Article 2 of the Charter states the tribunal shall consist of not less than 5, nor more than 9 members.
Given a large number of participants in the war effort, the US President Harry Truman wanted to let the Philippines and India participate. At the time of the planning stage, neither country was independent. There was a strong desire on the part of the British government that India, having had a part in the war effort, so that started a conversation of getting American colony to participate as well. So these two countries were added later on.
The International Military Tribunal for the Far East had 11 judges, one each from Australia, the United States, China, the United Kingdom, the Soviet Union, Canada, France, the Netherlands, New Zealand, India, and the Philippines. Justice William Webb of Australia was named the tribunal's president. Justice Mei Ju-ao and prosecutor Xiang Che-chun were appointed the representatives of China. Meanwhile, the International Prosecution Section, headed by Keenan, was collecting evidence. After the Japanese destroyed a vast amount of evidence, it was difficult to determine who was accountable for Japan's actions. To speed up the collection of evidence, Keenan set up an investigation branch staffed by former FBI operatives.
The International Prosecution Section was established with the mission to collect evidence concerning crimes against peace, which is the offense of planning, preparing, initiating, and waging aggressive war, or participate in a common plan to do so.
IPS prosecutors eventually uncovered 3 essential documents: the diary of Koichi Kido, the Lord Keeper of the Privy Seal, and Emperor Hirohito's closest advisor; the interrogation records of Ryokichi Tanaka, Major General of the Imperial Japanese Army, and Koichi's memorandum of the Privy Council. These 3 documents greatly helped determine who was responsible for what among Japan's senior officers and government officials.
隠してる、あるいは疎開してるっていうような書類もあるんですよね。で、例えば木戸孝一の内大臣木戸孝一の日記ですね。これなんかもこの裁判がなければあの時点では出てこなかったでしょうし、かなりの貴重な資料がですね、この裁判でもって集まった。これは東京裁判の甚だ大きな遺産かと思うんですね。
The Chinese government also considered the list of war criminals a matter of great importance. In October 1945, China established a committee to determine its strategy on war criminals. Xu Yongchang, who was the Chinese representative aboard the US Missouri when Japan surrendered, wrote in his diary, "On October 16, 1945, during a meeting concerning Japanese war criminals, Mr. Chiang handpicked the first 12 who were most responsible." According to Chiang Kai-shek's manuscript, the list originally contained 20 names. 12 of those he placed in order of importance, including Class A war criminals Kenji Doihara, Seishiro Itagaki, and Hideki Tojo, and then crossed out 2 names with a red pen. Between February and March 1946, the Chinese government, through prosecutor Xiang Che-chun, submitted 2 lists with 33 war criminal suspects to General MacArthur. Having considered opinions from many countries, the International Prosecution Section decided on a list of 28 Class A war criminals. It was passed immediately after MacArthur received it. The list included the names of 4 prime ministers, 3 foreign ministers, 10 from the Japanese Army, 3 from the Japanese Navy, 2 ambassadors, and the Lord Keeper of the Privy Seal of Japan.
The selection of war criminals in cases of large-scale conflicts with mass atrocity is always a very difficult process. Because of the duration and the scale of the conflict, the Tokyo defendants were selected both for their individual roles, but also as representatives of all of the different parts of the Japanese government and military that had contributed to both starting the war from 1931 to 1945, and also had participated in the commission of war crimes.
The International Military Tribunal for the Far East was held at Ichigaya Court, formerly the Imperial Japanese Army headquarters in Tokyo. This building housed the Imperial Japanese Army Academy, the country's most well-known military academy. During wartime, all military orders were issued from the headquarters. Looking back, it's a miracle this building survived the American airstrike towards the end of the war. On May 3, 1946, the International Military Tribunal for the Far East was officially convened. Nobody had expected the trial would take 2 years and 6 months.
International Military Tribunal for the Far East. Number 1.
While the indictment was being read, something unexpected occurred. Japanese nationalist writer Shumei Okawa, who was sitting on the defendant's bench, began crying out loud. For a long time, he had been advocating Pan-Asianism. His courtroom behavior was captured on camera.
那个东条呢就坐在第2排，八堂小明坐第3排，就在他前面。东条光头，啪一下子嘛，后面美国的 MP 啊就宪兵啊来抓起来，抓起来嘛他就装疯。
Okawa was examined by an American psychiatrist and was diagnosed with a mental illness. As a result, the charges against him were dropped.
我什么发疯？我装疯，他装的，那过去法庭被他骗过去。
The International Military Tribunal for the Far East was conducted in the manner of common law. The key feature in this system is the exchange between the prosecution and the defense. During this trial, both sides brought witnesses, heard testimonies, and submitted evidence. There were 3 major incidents covered by the tribunal: the Nanjing Massacre, the attack on Pearl Harbor, and the Bataan Death March.